Hey everybody. Happy Sunday evening. I am a little bit under the weather. I thought this morning that I might have had COVID, considering I am back to teaching in person at a school that does not mandate vaccines and or masks. But tested negative, which means I'm going to check tomorrow and make sure, but feeling not great. But do not let anybody tell you that I am not a trooper and that I'm not going to come through on Sunday evening. Cheers, everyone. We have a lot to talk about. We have a lot to go over. It has been a surreal day watching Afghanistan fall to the Taliban, watching the American empire both contract and also sort of spasm in a very odd way. A lot of defenders of American imperialism came out of the woodwork today. I am going to address a lot of that tonight because it is a very strange moment. It is a perplexing moment in a lot of different ways. It is both crushing and demoralizing in other ways, frustrating and angry making in others. I would be remiss if I didn't start this conversation tonight talking a little bit about the research I've been doing for the new book. I just started on chapter 6. I am currently at the dawning of the 20th century. I'm watching Germany right now, trying to catch up with all the other major nations because Germany was late to the nation state game and the colonial game. And one of the things that has been very surreal about doing the research on this project while experiencing the current moment is I'm still watching a lot of imperialism in the research in a really funny way. You keep seeing all these actors. You keep saying politicians, you keep seeing military commanders, the corporations that they work with, the business people that they work with. And by the way, it's the same story over and over and over again. The nation state will invade a country under the auspices of defense or spreading civilization. Meanwhile, what are they there to do? They're there to get resources. They're there to create new markets and or spheres of influence. And eventually, over time, as the colonial power continues to oppress, use violence, intimidation, political maneuverings, they just keep throwing up their hands and they say, I don't know what it is with these people. They can't be civilized. They don't understand civilization. They don't understand how to live in Western civilization. And one thing becomes very clear very quickly, and this is one of those things that I hope you walk away with tonight, which is there is a really damning worldview and ideology among the Western powers that they alone hold the secrets of civilization. They're the most civilized people ever because their idea of civilization is a line of progression, right? Every year, every new invention, every tick up on the stock market means that it's advancing in a way that is more civilized than it was in the past. And, weirdly enough, and hear me out here, it's strange because their ideas of civilization, those markers of civilization, those markers of progress are always to a factor, the factors that benefit the white Western powers economically and politically. But, they look at all these other cultures and they're like, they have to get up to where we are. They have to do what we're doing. But meanwhile, they just don't get it. And so for the past week before today, watching Afghanistan finally fall to the Taliban, it has been one article, one segment, one talking head saying, we were there for 20 years. We spent so much money and so much time. The Afghan people just don't get it. And by the way, they use all the words in the past that we've used for other colonies: barbarians, savages, right? That these people are less civilized, or that these people are somehow or another not on the trajectory of Western civilization. What we are dealing with today, I want to say first and foremost, is a tragedy. But it's also a tragedy that was a long time in the making. Since the invasion of Afghanistan, and again, like I cut my teeth on protesting the Iraq War. It's an understandable thing that post September 11th that we would strike out against a terrorist organization that struck within the United States. To go into a country with the megalomaniacal, racist, chauvinistic idea that we would just roll into these countries, which is what Bush did, what Cheney did, what the people around them did. They thought they would go into these countries, and America as an idea and as a set of principles would be so powerful as a symbol that people would just move away from all of their traditions, all their beliefs, all of their culture. They would give it up en masse because they would be so overwhelmed by the idea of American culture and American principles. Meanwhile, and we all know this because you've done research and reading, and you've hung out on these talks before. Meanwhile, that idea of American principles and American ideas, the thing that was supposed to bring them out into the streets, was a fiction to begin with. It wasn't real. It was a thing that hid a bunch of contradictions at the heart of the system of a racist, consumerist, problematic society that had not got its own shit together. Now, you can win hearts and minds in some ways, but that doesn't do it. That doesn't do it by going in and killing people, and by killing their families, and by just waylaying an entire culture, by committing war crimes, by going after people extra legally, by torturing people. It doesn't work. Now, I want to take a quick moment. I want to say I've known people who went to Afghanistan. I knew people who got injured in Afghanistan. I know people who have died in Afghanistan. It is an absolute tragedy that they were put in that situation. But they were put in that situation by a group of people with a megalomaniacal worldview that America should control the destinies of other countries and other peoples. It was an attempt to spread American markets, to spread American ideas. It was the idea that in some way, shape, or form, post-Soviet Union, that America, as the victor of the Cold War, although we all know that that's not true, we all know that the Cold War was more or less a mortal wound that was dished out between the United States and Russia that made us go and absolutely betray every espoused principle that we've ever had. High off that victory, we needed to go out and create nations or create states, build them. The idea that we should control what they do. And as if all of these people were absolutely thrilled that we were there doing it, telling them what to do. We came in, we broke their society, we killed a ton of them. And the next thing you know, you're like, man, that's weird that they didn't stick with us and put their lives on the line. A lot of the people who laid down their weapons today and yesterday, it wasn't necessarily because they were cowards. It was because a lot of them were waiting on us to leave. They were thrilled that we left. They were waiting on the first opportunity to throw off their uniforms and throw down their weapons and get in line with something else. What Bush and Cheney and Wolfowitz and Rumsfeld and an entire slate of neoconservatives thought was an attempt to change the world, an actual religious crusade. Now, it wasn't necessarily that they believed in it. I think Bush did. I think Bush was going along with the ideology at the heart of this thing. But then you have a lot of other people who were doing it both for profit, but also to carry out hegemony. They had plans for this for decades. It's disgusting and it's awful. And the moment that this thing started, it was always going to have a terrible end. Absolute, terrible, tragic end. And I've had people reach out to me today after, I've said some stuff about what's been going on. And they said, well, what would you want? Well, what I want doesn't matter, because what I want, or what I would want, is to literally travel back in time and make this not happen in the first place. What I would love to do is go back to 2001. And by the way, this is the thing that doesn't show up in any of these articles. It doesn't show up in any of these segments. It doesn't show up in any of these conversations. September 11th, 2001 didn't need to happen. It shouldn't have happened. The Bush administration was warned over and over and over again that this was going to happen. They either fell asleep at the wheel, or didn't care enough to take care of it, or were incompetent to the point where they couldn't do anything about it. That's what I would love to do, is to go back to a time where we could actually avoid the unnecessary tragedy of September 11th. I would also not mind going back in time and being an older person, or knowing people who could do something about it, or even getting to the point where the Democratic Party would have actually put up some kind of a fight against the authorization of war. It's awful. It's absolutely awful. So when people ask me, well, do you think they should stay or should they go? Neither is a good option. They're both terrible. My heart absolutely breaks thinking about what's going on to people over there today. It's awful. But I also don't think that we should be there forever. We shouldn't have been there in the first place. It's a terrible situation. It's what I was saying today. When you start lusting after empire, when you start working for empire, and you don't care what happens to people, when that's what occurs, and you're actually ignoring every piece of advice, every contrary opinion, every piece of imperial fact, you're destroying things. I also wish I could go back in time and stop the military blob, the so-called deep state, the thing that is happening in the background the entire time. That this could happen with Bush Cheney, and then go through Obama, through Trump, and now into Biden. And by the way, that's the other thing. We're not good in context. We're not good in understanding how this whole thing works. We're not good at understanding that once you start, it continues and continues and continues and grows. What we were looking at with Afghanistan right now is the possibility of being there and possibly having a civil war, possibly having another hot war in Afghanistan. And let me ask you that. Who wants to send their kids over for that? For a war that's been going on for 20 years. Who wants to send their kids over for that? Meanwhile, American society has mostly just completely forgotten Afghanistan and Iraq and all of the major operations around the world, because that is the perk of the forever war in this moment. It can be out there being handled by either, kids from poor families or paid contractors who you don't even have to really report what they're doing, or if they get hurt or wounded or dead, or, whether or not they're committing crimes on American dollars. It's terrible. It's terrible. It is disgusting shit. So I reject the premise of being told, do I have to choose between them being there or leaving? My choice is to not have this situation in the first place. My choice is to have a functioning government that actually cares about human beings more than they care about profits and power and hegemony. That's my choice. My choice is to have never had this shit show happen in the first place, and that we could have used our money, our political capital, and our time to have taken care of real problems, to have taken on climate change, to have taken on the educational crisis, the infrastructure crisis, the healthcare crisis. That's my choice. Instead, we get forever wars, where we spend trillions of dollars. We kill, I don't know how many people we killed, and engendered terrible will, spent every good piece of political capital that we had left from World War II. It's just gone. Gone. The national or the international order as it is right now If you were to look in 2000 and look at where we're at now, it's unrecognizable. It's like a completely different system. It's awful. It's absolutely awful. That's my choice, is to avoid doing that and to have actually like created a better society, an actual great society, as opposed to this forever war bullshit that the military industrial complex just used and corporations use to gain money and markets and resources. And then all of a sudden, after years and years and years of forced austerity and militarism, we look up and we have rising authoritarianism and we're like, where the hell did this come from? Are you kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me? My choice is to not have any of that. My choice is to avoid all of that. And that's where I was in the beginning, and that's where a lot of us were in the beginning. Because we knew it was wrong. It was obviously wrong. Bush harnessed the anger and the fear from September 11th, a disaster that he should have avoided in the first place. That's my choice, is to have somebody who actually takes care of that shit. So now, and I'm going to get to the questions here in a second because people want to talk about Afghanistan. They want to talk about the fallout from this. Now we have to sit here and we have to watch. God knows how long and how much of this we're going to have to put up with. So Alfonso starts off by saying, 20 years in Afghanistan, no exit strategy. Doesn't that tell us what we were there for? We were there because there was no way that our control over Afghanistan was going to stay. The moment when we walked out, this was going to happen. Everyone knew it. The intelligence community knew it. The military knew it. What they overestimated, and this is important, this is something to remember in the next couple of days. They all expected the Taliban to overthrow Afghanistan. They all expected it. But everyone's like, man, that happened a lot faster than we expected. Why? Why were they wrong? They're outfitted with the best technology, the best intelligence. Why were they wrong? They were wrong because they overestimated the appeal of America. They overestimated. They thought they had won the hearts and minds of some of the Afghan people and that they weren't going to just lay down their weapons and take off their uniforms and join the Taliban. They overestimated themselves. That's the whole point. They don't understand it because we live in a fog of patriotism and American exceptionalism. We thought that they were going to fight to the death with us. But yeah, we didn't have any plan. We were just going to stay there and continue to pay money and expend lives. That was the entire plan. That was the entire plan all along. Everyone knew what would happen the moment they pulled out of there. It was like one of those houses built on a movie set that doesn't have anything behind it. It's just like a front, a facade, and then it fell. And it's tragic. It's terrible. It's heartbreakingly awful. Dronty says, the question is the fall of Kabul going to be curtains for the Biden administration effectively? I fear the GOP will use it to tank the remains of his term. So here's the thing, and like basically, and this is important, I want to point it out. A lot of the time when we talk about politics, what we're actually talking about is we're talking about media narratives, because that's what politics has more or less become in this country. I keep saying it. It's a television show that we watch and comment on. And on top of that, like a lot of what we pay attention to is whether or not like narratives and whether or not appeals are going to work, right? It's like watching SportsCenter and hearing about the strategy behind the game. We're not actually talking about the game. We're talking about the strategy behind what's happening in the locker room, what's happening behind the scenes. So I'm of a couple of minds here about what's going to happen. First and foremost, the media, and by the way, like I'm going to be honest with you, I don't get on here to bullshit. I don't get on here to blow smoke. So I'm going to tell you this. The majority of the major media, mainstream media, does lean towards the liberal. But they are so insecure about that. They are so scared of being called out on being liberals or being on the left that they're constantly trying to show that they are not biased. And on top of that, man, do they love the military. Why? Because the military like allows them to say, look, we're tough on this stuff too. It's the same reason the Democrats do it. But the media also gets all of that cool intelligence. They get all those cool graphics. They get to ride along in tanks. And in exchange for that, they're more than happy to carry the water for the military industrial complex. They love it. So, on the subject of what is happening right here, this is a ready-made mainstream media narrative, which is, watch us go after this Democratic president. I know you always accuse us of being in Biden's pocket or laying down for Biden. Watch us go after him for this. And on top of that, we'll go ahead and pay lip service to the military. Because if you haven't noticed today, everything coming out of media narrative pundits, politicians, and journalists has been, oh, the media did everything that they could. It was the Afghan people. It was the Biden administration. Oh my God, we kept telling these people that this was the wrong move. And meanwhile, the media continues to tell you that the military has nothing to do with this entire situation. They are carrying the water for the military industrial complex. So yeah, I would not be shocked if Biden gets dinged up on this really, really in a big way, that it's a constant conversation. Now, that being said, the other mind that I am of here is that Americans don't care about this. And that's a really awful thing to say out loud, but I don't think it makes it any less true. The forever wars, one of the reasons that they were able to go on as long as they did is because Americans tuned it out. They paid attention for a very long time to what was going on in Afghanistan and Iraq, especially when it was on TV, and especially as every article was about what was going on. But eventually it just turns into the frontier. It just turns into something that's going on, and eventually Americans sort of became numb to it. They weren't even really paying attention to what was going on in Afghanistan and Iraq anymore, mainly because they weren't asked to sacrifice anything. Like, some people, of course, had their children and their loved ones who were in Afghanistan or Iraq, but most people didn't pay attention to it. It was like something that worked in the background. It was like a computer program that runs in the background and whirs, and you don't even know about it until you look and see what the actual processes are. So that's the question. Are we going to have a moment where this becomes a big, massive scandal? I don't know. I really don't know. It feels like a real toss-up, like the ball being thrown up in the air for a jump ball. I have no clue, but I do know that the media is going to report on this. You're not going to be able to go anywhere without hearing about this, without military coming on, without former generals and veterans coming on. You're going to be seeing a lot of that. The question is whether or not that moves the needle and whether or not that proves to be a ratings getter. We're going to watch the Republican Party probably over the next couple of months go full on jingoistic, chauvinistic, imperialistic. That's going to be something over the next couple of days. I mean, we've already seen some of them already, not just criticizing Biden, but really saying some stuff about an American president that is a little bit different. Not even just disrespectful, just sort of things that ring of not even supporting, but to the point where it's open antagonism and hatred. It's a lot. So I don't know. I don't know what this is going to feel like over the next couple of weeks, but I think that the media is going to push it really, really hard. The question is whether or not the American people care about Afghanistan. And I can tell you over the past few years, they haven't. Rich, I know it's cynical to turn our domestic politics, but even though Trump initially set this pullout, the right is going to use this in 2022 and beyond to get more power. Your thoughts on how to counter that? So that's another thing that gets completely lost in all of that, which is Biden was operating based on the deal that Donald Trump made with the Taliban, which, if you remember, that barely got any attention whatsoever when Donald Trump signed that agreement with the Taliban. That was a big moment that a lot of us stood up and said, what? And when it happened, it barely got, it was during that Trump, tsunami of news. It was like another one of those things. You're like, what in the hell? Oh, something else has happened. All of a sudden, something over here. And it was just so much. There was such a flood of news that we were never able to like fully wrap our heads around it. But one of the things is that it just got to the point where something was going to happen after this agreement, and nobody's going to blame it on Trump whatsoever. They're not even going to mention Trump in these articles. They don't mention Bush. They don't mention Cheney. They don't mention Rumsfeld. They don't mention the neoconservatives. They don't mention the Project for a New American Century. They sure as shit aren't mentioning Trump. But yeah, I could see the Republican Party, in my mind's eye, their next convention is just going to be about Biden being a traitor and having betrayed the country and having handed it back over to the Taliban, which is, by the way, what everybody knew was going to happen the moment that we pulled out of any of these countries. We knew this was going to be a problem. We knew it was going to be a political scandal or crisis or whatever, and that came with the territory. So they're absolutely going to go militaristic. I would not be shocked to see this turning into a Biden is a traitor. We're the party of the military, which is the way that the Republican Party goes all the time. All right, I got two questions here together with Zach. Jared, can you do a few minutes on the media and the right wing's hyperventilation of the Afghan pullout? Even the MAGAs who have been screaming about endless wars are changing their stance suddenly. Can you speak to this level of bad faith and cynicism? And also the LAPD lack of response to the Proud Boy violence in LA yesterday was nuts. Why is the police coddled with Proud Boys? Well, to answer your second question first, the police work with paramilitary groups and far-right violent groups. They always have, since the beginning that there were far-right paramilitary street gangs, and since there were organized police. They've always gone hand in hand. In fact, since the beginning, they've shared a lot of members who are parts of both groups. So that's always been the case. Like law enforcement and far-right paramilitary groups and street gangs have always worked together and been on the same side. They go after liberals and left-wing people. That's always been what they do. They protect property, they protect capitalism. That's how the whole thing works. And that's how it has always been. So that's why they are, sheltering the Proud Boys. It's always been the case. I didn't understand that until I was doing the new book. And then I came across like the background, which is where the original sort of anti-revolutionary police absolutely were forming these paramilitary groups that they were a part of. During the day, they were police and they upheld the law. At night, they were with the paramilitary groups that broke the law. And that same thing. The first part about that bad faith, this is what I keep saying, and one of the things that if you learn anything from what I talked about, like this hopefully is one of them, which is they don't have any actual principles. They can change on a dime. I was talking to Danny Bessner on the Muckrake podcast last week, and he made a good point, which is that Trump supporters were against the wars in Afghanistan and in Iraq, but God knows if Trump would have started a war that they would have been all for that. It's whatever the moment calls for. They have a malleable ideology, which makes them incredibly dangerous and also really, really effective. There is no such thing as actual right-wing ideology beyond control, power, and profit. That's it. Everything else is just in service of those things. It just depends on what the situation needs. They'll be for small government one day, they'll be for large government the next, particularly when they're in charge of the government. But yeah, it just moves constantly. Pete Campbell, Afghanistan is not surprising. No, it's not. Not for any of our troops who are there or for you, right? Nope, not at all. If I understand your normal context of understanding, it was nothing more than a continuation of U.S. white supremacy and arrogance and money making through weapons sales. Yeah, I mean, that sort of goes into it. The other part of it, of course, is the geopolitical part, which is the idea that, if you can, like they think about politics actually as a game of risk. or chess, right? Which is, there are pieces on the board, there are pawns, and what actually matters is what the ruling elite want, or, what's good for the nation state, which weirdly enough is always the same thing that's good for the ruling elite. Isn't it weird how that always happens? What a coincidence. So yeah, it was absolutely about resource extraction. It was about trying to create this foothold and sphere of influence in the Middle East. They truly and honestly believed that they were going to create this moment of massive change in which American principles were going to spread. And of course they did, because they won the Cold War. They thought it was the end of history. The capitalism and the American way were going to triumph forever and ever and ever. It's really weird how that happens. The people who run empire always think that the empire is going to last forever, and it leads to more and more expansion and more of these opportunities to go out and destroy itself. They destroyed themselves. America destroyed itself in this regard, and there's a reason why we've reached the point where we are now. And yeah, it doesn't hurt that you have a military-industrial complex that needs war and conflict in order to keep making the materials and making the money that they have. It's a cycle. Always, always, always goes. If you think that those people, by the way, are upset that some of those weapons and arms ended up in Afghanistan and that it might lead to more battles, absolutely not. They get paid in every battle. They get paid every time that there's war. It's a business. As Smedley Butler said, war is a racket. They're making tons of money from that shit. All right, I got Mountain Girl. Please discuss your thoughts on the military/Biden not making any plan to get our Afghan allies out and not knowing where to take them. I'm both livid and disgusted. Me too. I was talking with Nick about this on the podcast. I guess it was on the Weekender episode. By the way, if you want those, it's patreon.com/Muckrake Podcast. It helps out and you get a free episode. But we were talking about this on Friday. I was doing a story back in late 2016, I guess the Muslim ban would have happened in 2017. Yeah. So in 2017, I was working on this story where I was talking to a lot of people who had aided the allies over in Afghanistan. And this was during the Muslim ban, immigration ban that Trump had put forward, that like crazy moment of chaos. And all of these people just got completely screwed over. And they really thought that they were going to have an immediate exit, that America was never going to turn their back on them. And that started in 2017 for a lot of these people in Afghanistan. And over the past few years, there's been this absolute terror that eventually we were going to pull out. But once we pulled out, that they would probably get pulled out before the troops got pulled out. In fact, a lot of them thought that the first hint of U.S. withdrawal would be getting our allies out. That would happen before the troops got out. And everyone was sort of waiting on that and thought that would sort of be the sign that the end was nigh. Yeah, it's really gross. They truly, truly overestimated what the Afghan people were going to do. They literally thought that they were going to stay and fight and hold off the Taliban for a while. They really, truly thought that. That was a massive, massive mistake. Vivaldi, Four Seasons, says, I actually heard some pundits say maybe we just need to stay there in some form permanently. How's this at all reasonable? It's not. How can folks say that we should occupy a sovereign nation forever with a straight face, especially seeing now how 20 years was undone in a few weeks? That's the big question. And the answer, unfortunately, is that these are people who think that the United States should control the world. And what's at the heart there, as if I need to make it more clear or say it more expressly, I'll do it. It's racism. It's white supremacy. It's the chauvinism. It's the idea that America is the greatest country in the world, that its people have been ordained by God, that we're that much better than everybody else. And they think that because, we won the world wars, even though we kind of survived more than other people. And we had this massive economic expansion because corporations controlled everything in the country. Labor was put down. There was major oppression so that the ruling elite could consolidate their power and gain a ton of profit. And for that reason, we should rule everything. And there are a lot of people who, they'll come out and they'll tell you that they think that the white American race is the race that should rule the world. But I will also tell you that there are a ton of people. You've watched them for years. You might follow them on Twitter. You might read their books. You might listen to them all the time. They do not believe that they're being white supremacists when they talk about how America should rule the world. They think there's something intangible in America. It's a mythology. It's a religion, is what it is. America is a nation. It's a social construct. Nations are social construct. And the way that they legitimize what they're doing is by telling stories about themselves and mythologies and creating religions and cults around themselves. That's what this is. America is not greater than any other nation. Americans do not have some sort of internal greatness that we can't hold back. It just makes sure that we do everything on the right. That's a mythology. That's a fairy tale that we tell ourselves. It's a lie, a story that we tell ourselves that make us feel better about how we hurt other people. Nations are constructs. National mythologies are constructs. America is not God's champion or the universal champion of good and righteousness and liberty. We're a nation that makes mistakes, and sometimes we get it right. We go back and forth between the two because that's how things work. That's real stuff. That's how the world actually works. But these people truly believe that there is some American quality that means that we should direct the will and direction of the world. That's bullshit. It's not just bullshit, it's embarrassing bullshit. The world is better when America is leading it. Oh, is it? Is it? Is that right? Because last time I checked, every one of your Western democracies is under trouble with authoritarianism and white supremacy that you helped create. It's really strange when you look at all of this and you realize that we're living in the consequences of all of these people who thought that America should be in control of everything. We shouldn't. That's not how things should work. The quicker that we learn that, the quicker that we learn that these nation ideas and ideologies and characters, once you start to realize that, you can start to progress. You can start treating people better. You can start treating the world better. But I'm telling you right now that these lies that somehow or another that we are ordained to do this, they're dangerous. They're incredibly dangerous. So that's how people say it with a straight face, is because they are literally telling you, without telling you, that they believe in white supremacy and American exceptionalism, which is embarrassing and dangerous. It's childish. It's actually absolutely childish. Tori says, just how does this mess get solved? It can't just be the U.S., Middle East, politics are complicated. Any thoughts at all? No, not really. I think going off of what I just said, it would be a whole lot better if we could treat the Afghan people like human beings. If you want to do something to take care of people, if you want to do something to make sure that atrocities aren't committed and that human rights aren't violated, get the international community in there. Have some sort of an alliance to go in and try and fix this mess. Because Americans just sending troops, it's just going to continue and continue and continue. And if that is the way that we go, if we're just going to send thousands more troops and we're just going to engage in more battles, the cycle's just going to keep going. So we got to step back, we have to take a breath, and we have to try and bring in the international community. That's the only thing that we can do. But it is an absolute mess. Just a total mess. Toonbox says, in a quickish pitch, how would you explain the seriousness of this moment to people who don't know history? Okay. I will tell you this. Very serious people who are experts in history, in politics, fascism, authoritarianism, and democracy, they're terrified of what's happening right now. That's my quick pitch, is that I understand that people like me who've been talking about this and screaming about this for a few years, I understand that people think that I'm reactionary, and I think people sometimes think that, I'm talking about fears, unfounded fears, even though what I talk about, unfortunately, comes true a lot of the time. The people who know about this stuff, when you talk to them, they're concerned. They're really, really, really concerned. If I want to give you a second pitch, if you would allow, I'll say this, that the people I know who work in things like ethnic cleansing, genocide remembrance, and genocide studies, these are not people who call everything a possible genocide or a possible Nazi regime. They're worried. They're really, really worried. That's my quick pitch. But if you look at history, it's so clear. It's so obvious how bad things are and how bad the crisis actually is. If you actually know history, if you actually pay attention to it, it's a really frightening moment. All right, aggressive, sarcastic scientist. How do you see the infrastructure deals working out? Is it looking like we'll get both, none, or just the corporate package? In American politics, one of the things that you come to expect, particularly as the parties do their little dance, is if something looks like it's going to pass, it will probably be closer to the middle. The corporate package that this question is mentioning is probably going to be the one that passes. But I am very, very excited that we're going to get some money out there for infrastructure in some of these projects. I think that is a win. But I also think that we need a lot more, that this is just a drop in the bucket. Politically, I think it's a win, which is something that needed to happen. And also, by the way, proof that at least, and I have problems with the Democratic Party, a hell of a lot of problems with the Democratic Party, but at least they will come in and they will pass something that will try and help people as opposed to just tax cuts for the rich and deregulation. So at least that's good. But again, this is not enough. It's a drop in the bucket if it goes through the way that it currently looks like it's going to. Dory says, where's this violence around vaccination mandates coming from? Murdoch's media, QAnon, Tucker, Trump. Somebody got stabbed at a protest this weekend, and Oz is also having violence issues at testing and vaccination sites where nurses are getting assaulted. It's really bad. So this goes into a lot of what I'm always talking about. And this is unfortunately what we've been watching for a while now, which is the far right, or the right wing, whatever you want to call them, the right wing media, and the GOP and their assortment of politicians are constantly fear mongering about worse things, that, these apocalyptic things that are always their way of going after the Democratic Party, which is anywhere from a center left to a center right party, a very, very large umbrella, but it is not at all radical or socialist or left wing. They have been using this apocalyptic fear mongering for so long that they actually have their base believing that they could be killed, that they could be destroyed, that their homes could be taken away, that they could be betrayed to, the New World Order, where they'll be sterilized and thrown into camps and all of that stuff. It has gotten so bad that when they start talking about having to wear a mask or having to get a vaccine that will save their lives or their families' lives, that is still in their mind the beginning of the march into the camps. Having to wear a mask for them, having a government or having a city that can tell them that they have to wear a mask has been equated to being marched to their certain deaths inside of a concentration camp. That didn't happen overnight. That is not a spontaneous idea. And one of the things you'll notice, and I don't talk about this enough, but this is a good place to start talking about it, which is when they interview these people, when they go in front of city councils, when they go on TV, whenever you hear them talking about these conspiracy theories, you'll notice they say the same things. It's the same script over and over and over again. I think this is like Nazi Germany. I think that this is, we're going to be put in camps. They're going to take our guns. They're lying. They're in league with China. The scientists are in on it. When they say the same things, it's not by accident. It's because they have been living in a right-wing designed paranoid echo chamber. They've heard this stuff for years, for decades. They have heard it over and over to the point that they will say it without even understanding it, without even having a basic understanding of the fears that they are relaying to the person that they're talking to. That's not by accident. They didn't all just one day spontaneously start thinking about this stuff. This is a script that they have been taught by Fox News, by Rush Limbaugh, by the right-wing ecosystem. This is the thing that they have been given. So this whole thing has been teaching them what to say and how to feel, unfortunately. It's the same thing over and over. So that's where the violence is coming from. They literally believe that it's do or die. And, I've been spending a lot of time recently, like upping my intake of those narratives, of those voices, because I want to understand exactly where it is and what it's doing. And unfortunately, it's only getting worse. Because when you fearmonger, when you actually throw out those apocalyptic fears, they're going to take your family, your guns, they're going to throw you in camps, you're going to die, you're going to be sterilized, yada, 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 yada. You have to keep doing more of it. It has to escalate because the story is that things are getting progressively worse, right? That leftists are on the march and they're going to do this and they're going to do that and tomorrow's going to be the apocalypse if you don't blah, 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 blah. Eventually, if you convince your base that that is true, and they believe that at this point, when they actually believe that that is what is at stake and that things are that dangerous and apocalyptic, you have no choice. If that's what you truly believe, if you truly believe that your family is going to be destroyed, you're going to be killed, and you're going to be thrown in camps, and that the satanic new world order is just right around the corner, you have no choice. It's do or die. It's fight or flee. Flee or fight. You kill. Yeah. You're exactly right. It has so much to do with the conspiracy theories around the Jews. I just got in the new book, like I said, I just finished chapter 5. So I'm like right at the dawning of the 20th century. And, unfortunately, that's where Protocols of the Elders of Zion shows up in Russia, which is where modern anti-Semitism and the way that it works really got its sea legs. And why did it happen? It happened because you had an authoritarian, an autocratic czar who wanted to crack down on people and wanted to discredit people calling for social reform and human rights. And so what did they do? They created this conspiracy that added on to other conspiracies that people had about the Jewish people for, decades and decades and decades. And so what did they do? They say, well, these people who are calling for reform, or they're calling for, more equal representation, or, help, or they're looking for like more responsive leadership. They're not real. They're actually traitors, and they're in league with this giant conspiracy. And that's a cover. And by the way, like if there's a conspiracy to overthrow the government, well, we all know what you can do to traitors. You can kill traitors. So all of a sudden you can throw them in jails. You can throw them in camps. You can kill them. It's a way to legitimize preemptive violence. And that conspiracy theory has always been the way this stuff works. Juxtapose says, what's the safest U.S. state to live in if the worst happens in terms of authoritarianism? I say that as someone who's giving a nervous look at the California governor recall. Listen, I got to tell you the truth. If things collapse or if things get very, very bad, there aren't going to be a whole lot of places to go. This is happening everywhere. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of us are really, really concerned right now, which is that all of the major nations are under attack by authoritarian, autocratic people. They are gaining power and numbers and momentum. This is another reason why the Hungarian trip by Tucker Carlson was so bad. So you have these major states that are under attack by this stuff, and in which liberal democracy, individual rights, all of that, elections in general are being chipped away at. You also have a lot of strongmen authoritarians who are starting to consolidate power. This is one of the reasons why you had people, of course, like Putin, Bourbon, Bolsonaro, even Netanyahu, Trump. You had all of these people starting to come together and supporting each other and gifting each other platforms and legitimizing, this creeping authoritarianism. But you've also got the sort of economic pendulum coming down where things are really, really bad, and liberal democracy is faltering because the wealthy and the powerful have gained too much wealth and power, and that they have taken over nation states, more or less. They've transcended that. They've evolved beyond the size of the nation state, which, by the way, is funny. I was, again, writing chapter 5 of the new book, and I was reading H.G. Wells. The guy did War of the Worlds and Time Machine. He predicted this at the end of the 19th century. He said, these corporations and monopolies in America have grown so large that they're going to grow larger than America itself, and they're going to eclipse liberal democracy. And eventually we'll reach the point where those corporations and those wealthy people are going to rule the world. And it's not going to matter about elections anymore. I mean, he called that at the end of the 19th century. I was kind of shocked, honestly, because I've been talking about this for a while, and I had never come across this from H.G. Wells. It was pretty shocking that he went ahead and called that back then. But that's where we're at. So the whole point of what I'm saying is that I don't know if there's an alternative. I don't know if there's much to do if we don't stave this thing off. And I don't say that to be pessimistic. I don't say that to be cynical. I don't say that to, piss on your parade. I'm saying that because we need to stop this. We need to find a better way. Like, this thing in Afghanistan is brutal and heartbreaking, but it's also a notice that this doesn't work. That this thing that we've been told most of our lives is how the world should operate and how America should behave and treat everybody else, that it was all a lie. All along, it never actually worked. And it wasn't like we were naive and these people were realists or whatever, pragmatists, and we had kumbaya, we had our heads in the cloud. The people talking about peace and love and understanding, they just don't know what they're talking about. Leave politics and statecraft to real people. Well, they didn't have any idea what they were doing. They fell on their ass. They absolutely just screwed it all up. And I was talking about, we were talking about this on the Muckrake podcast not too long ago. The intelligence report admitted it. And it's not supposed to be read by you and me, by the way. It's for intelligence community. It's for the military. It's for political leaders. And basically it said, you know what? The American project of the last 50 years is just, it didn't work. Ugh. was a confession. Tessie said, should blue staters plan on a breakaway republic? I was saying this on the podcast the other day too. Like, I would not be shocked, like, if somebody came back from the future and told me what ends up happening is that America sort of starts to move in more sort of like regional political, conglomerations. I wouldn't be shocked. But I truly, honestly think, like, if you're gonna corner me and you're going to say, where do I think that this is going to end up? What I would tell you is I think that at some point or another, I think that there is going to be a reckoning with something like climate change, or even possibly a world war type crisis. I would not be shocked by that. And one of the things that the world wars sort of do, when you really look at them, is they make very clear the directions in which the world shouldn't go or should go. And I feel like we're heading towards a sea change. And one of the major problems that we have has been generational. I mean, we have a aging ruling elite. And I think that there is going to be a moment where the sea changes. I truly, truly do. I think there are too many balls up in the air. We're juggling too many balls. We're watching too many things that are going out of control. I think that something is going to happen that changes things in a way that is almost impossible to imagine right now. But yeah, if this thing goes south, and especially with climate change, messing with borders and resources and refugees, I don't know. I really don't know where you go. I don't see it being okay, is what I would say. But I think things are going to get better. I do. I think we're going to avoid the major meltdown and the worst possible future. And there are a bunch of worst possible futures. Let me just go ahead and say that. There are a lot of things that could happen that are very, very bad. Existential Haiku says, the right have been arming themselves for decades. We have legions of military, political, airsoft men practiced at kicking doors. Oh, man. Military, poll, airsoft men practiced at kicking doors. When food supplies collapse from climate change, I fear the violence a nation of armed and hungry will unleash on ourselves. If I had to guess, if there is some sort of an authoritarian moment or there is some sort of a coup type situation with the far right, what I would probably say is that it would not be some sort of spontaneous outburst of violence. I think actually a lot of people on the right sort of fantasize about this. They sort of have like an ingrown fantasy of like a crystal knocked. They sort of really love the idea of one day picking up their gun and having to do battle or having to like fight someone to the death. You might remember the things that I think about all the time. You might remember this, which is that Alex Jones one day got on like an absolute rant and he's like, I'll kill my neighbor. I'll string him up and I'll kill him. I'll feed him to my kids. They love that. They love that idea. And, I grew up with a ton of people who have fantasies about that, like this idea of like an armed civil war battling in the streets, life or death between you and me, and I have to take you down, all of that. I don't think necessarily we're going to reach that point. If we reach that point, it will be because we look up one day and suddenly there's no more gas, there's no more food getting to grocery stores. All of a sudden, regional authorities start to fail. You start to see like a Mad Max type situation. And by the way, it doesn't mean that won't necessarily happen. But I don't think there will be a spontaneous outburst of violence like that. But there are people who fantasize about that stuff. Do not get me wrong. There are people who absolutely fantasize about that stuff. Monica, I know there's a lot to cover this evening, but can you please remind your California listeners to vote no on the recall so we don't end up with a GOP Trumpian governor? Yeah, vote no on the recall. I have my problems with Gavin Newsom, and I don't think he's been a perfect governor, but I can tell you that this right now is absolutely a right-wing attempt at a power grab in California. It's the only way that they can take over the gears of power. That's it. So that is a situation where absolutely I say vote no. Find another candidate later. All right, we're coming up to 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Cheers, everyone. Oh, I really appreciate you coming out and hanging out tonight. This Afghanistan thing is so infuriating. So infuriating. And watching the way people are absolutely not covering the actual issues, which is shocking, I know. But to actually reckon with what has happened in the Middle East and with Afghanistan takes a lot of actual self-reflection and to understand what American capitalism and exceptionalism has done to this country and how it's led us astray and how it's hurt us and how it's cost us better lives and human dignity. Yeah, it's been really, really brutal. And I'll be keeping an eye on that. We'll be talking about this undoubtedly on the new Muckrake podcast that comes out Tuesday. A reminder, if you want the extra show, The Weekender, all you got to do is go over to patreon.com/Muckrake podcast. We depend on your support. I do as well over at jaredyatessexton.substack.com. I appreciate all of you telling me to do that. It has been a really good thing for my writing and my ability to get my information out there. So I've really, really appreciated that. I hope you are well. I hope you're taking care of yourself, taking deep breaths, celebrating the victories when they happen. I think things are going to be okay. I think we're going to figure this thing out, but we are in danger and we're in the middle of a crisis. So yeah, thank you for showing up, the support. If you don't already, send these videos and articles out to people. Let them know what's going on. Let them know what is actually happening and why it's happening, which is something, unfortunately, that a lot of our politicians and pundits and writers and journalists don't actually want to talk about. So I appreciate you so much. I'm going to go rest and hopefully heal up. Next time I do this, I hope to be in better health, ready to get after it even more. Good night, everybody.